Some selves appear the way waves appear, not as separate things, as shapes the whole makes visible for a while. A wave is not apart from the ocean, but it is not nothing. It rises, it holds an edge. The edge appears as if it contained something that belonged only to itself, as if the shape were a second substance inside the first. It becomes visible because the water has taken a form. The voice is not the object. The object is the boundary the voice pointed toward. The archive does not follow the speaker. It follows the shape left visible when the speaker is no longer required to explain the water. The archive begins at that boundary. The surface of the ocean is moving, not toward any shore. There is no shore visible at this hour, no edge in any direction, only dark water extending to where it meets dark sky, at a line that is not a line, but a condition of visibility. The surface is moving. Not all of it in the same direction, not all of it at the same rate. Each point on the surface is doing what the water below it is doing, and what the water below that is doing, and what the energy that entered this body of water at another location has been doing since it entered. A shape rises. It is not a separate thing. It is not water that has decided to move while the water around it stays still. It is the surface taking a form. The water at the crest displaced upward by what arrives from below. The water on the advancing side drawn into the shape the arriving energy requires. The water on the trailing side released back toward the level the surrounding ocean holds. The shape moves across the surface. The water does not. The water did not choose to become a wave. The energy arrived at the surface. The water took the form the energy required. No part of the ocean gathered itself into a shape and departed. No part decided to separate from the rest. The energy moved through. The surface took a form. The form advanced. This is what the ocean does with what arrives at its surface. It passes the form forward without passing itself forward. Each water particle, as the shape passes overhead, traces a small circle, rising as the crest approaches, moving forward at the peak, falling as the crest passes, moving back as the trough follows, returning to the place it began. The particle describes a circle and comes home. The shape has moved the length of that circle's diameter and is already calling the next particle into the same motion. What travels is not the water. The water at the crest returns. The form advances. What advances is not a piece of the ocean. It is the requirement that the water ahead take the same form, briefly, and in taking it, passes the same requirement into the water beyond. What is the boundary between the wave and the ocean? Not a surface, not a wall, not a place where one substance ends and another begins. The water in the wave is the same water as the ocean. The molecules at the crest are the same molecules that were at the level surface before the shape arrived and will be at the level surface again after the shape passes. Nothing has been added, nothing has been removed. The boundary is the shape itself. The shape is a description of what the water is doing at a particular moment. Rising here, falling there. The surface arranged by the energy passing through it into a form that has a crest and a trough and a forward motion. The boundary between wave and ocean is the edge of this description. Where the description applies, there is a wave. Where it no longer applies, there is ocean. The water is continuous throughout. Where the wave ends is not a location. It is a condition, the point at which the water's participation in the form falls below what the form requires. Approached from inside the wave, the boundary is where the surface is still rising. Approached from outside, it is where the surface has returned to level. Between these two approaches, no sharp edge. The wave does not end at a line. It ends the way a sound ends in open air, at the point where what remains falls below what can be distinguished from the surface's own baseline motion. The boundary is real. The line the boundary was thought to occupy is not there. A self may appear at this kind of boundary, not where one substance ends and another begins, where a form has made itself visible at the surface of something continuous. The edge is real. The water inside it and the water outside it have not separated. Breath enters. Breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The shape arrived at this location from elsewhere, not the water. The energy that the water is currently shaped around entered this body of ocean at another location. Wind acting on the surface at distance, the friction of moving air against the water's surface layer, that friction becoming motion in the water, that motion propagating outward in all directions at the rate the ocean's depth and density allow. The wind that made this shape has long since moved on. The air pressure that drove the wind came from a temperature difference between two regions of ocean surface, one having received more of the sun's heat, one less, the uneven warming setting the air in motion from one toward the other. The sun that produced that difference has not been in this sky for hours. The shape crossing this water tonight carries a history that extends back through wind, through air pressure, through uneven heat, to a solar event that preceded this night by half a rotation of the Earth. The water here has never left. At any point on the surface where the shape has not yet arrived, the water is at its level. As the shape arrives, that water rises into the form, traces the circle, and returns. The shape continues. The water that participated for a moment no longer participates. Different water is in the shape now. The water ahead, rising into the form the arriving energy produces. Each portion of water participates, then returns. The shape recruits the next and the next. Not because the water is being carried forward, but because the arriving energy requires that the water at each location take that form briefly and release it as the energy passes. What the energy passes forward is not water, but the requirement, the precise form the next water will be asked to hold before it too is released. What moves is an arrangement's capacity to reproduce itself in the water ahead. There is a second shape behind the first, and behind that others. The surface at this hour is not one wave, but a field of overlapping forms, each the result of a different energy input at a different location and a different time, each advancing at the rate its own size determines, each passing through the same water the others are using. The water at any point rises and falls in response to the sum of all the shapes currently passing through it. Where two shapes arrive at the same point at the same moment, the water rises to what both crests require. The water does not distinguish the source of what arrives. It responds to the total of what is present. The result belongs to neither shape independently. It lasts only as long as the two shapes remain at the same location, separating into its components as they continue at their different rates. Where two shapes arrive at the same point in opposite configurations, one at its crest as the other reaches its trough, the surface holds level. The rising required by one is met exactly by the falling required by the other. The water appears still. The energy is still there. Both shapes are still passing through. Neither has been absorbed. Neither has stopped. The apparent stillness is not the absence of motion. It is two motions, exact and opposite, at the same location at the same moment. A moment later, the shapes have moved past each other, each continuing at its own rate through the same continuous water, each emerging on the far side unchanged. The stillness was not absence. It was two presences at the same location at the same moment, neither meeting the other as a separate thing meets a separate thing. Each passed through, each continued. The water returned to what it was. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Below the surface, the water participates in each passing shape to a depth the shape's own size allows. The motion becomes smaller as it descends. The circle each water particle traces as the shape passes overhead, becoming smaller with depth. The radius narrowing again. Until at sufficient depth, the passage of the surface shape produces no motion that can be distinguished from the water's own baseline. The deep water holds what the deep water holds. Its temperature, stable across seasons in a way the surface cannot be. Its pressure, the weight of all the water above it maintained at each depth. Its slow, large-scale currents, moving on scales of months and years, indifferent to the shapes crossing the surface far above. The shapes above do not reach the deep water, the same water, different depths, different relationships to what is passing through. At the surface, the water is in the shape. The circle is at its widest. The participation is complete. Deeper, the circle is smaller, the participation partial. At sufficient depth, the shape is not present. The transition is not a boundary. It is a gradient, the participation becoming smaller continuously. The shape fading into the water rather than ending at a line. The wave is fullest where the water is closest to the surface. The wave diminishes as the water deepens. The water is continuous in both directions. The shape will continue across this water until the water takes what the water takes from any motion passing through it. The organized motion becomes smaller over distance. The crest lowers. The trough rises. The circle each particle traces becomes smaller. The edge of the description approaches the point where the water's participation falls below what a visible form requires. This will happen at the rate it happens, not faster because nothing is watching, not slower because something is. The shape will not decide to stop. It will reach the point where what remains can no longer arrange the surface. The motion that was form will have become indistinguishable from the motion that is simply water at this temperature, at this depth, this far from any shore. The description will no longer apply. What traveled was real. Where it went cannot be marked on any surface. The form is real. The thing the form was thought to be is not there. There is no wave crossing this ocean as a separate object. There is the ocean moving in the way the passing energy requires. The wave is the name for this requirement. The name is accurate. What the name implies, an object, bounded, traveling, separable from the water it moves through, is a description the eye produces when it watches the shape advance and concludes that something is advancing with it. The eye is not wrong to see the shape. The shape is there. The shape is the ocean. What the ocean holds tonight is not waves, but conditions. Conditions under which the surface arranges itself into form stable enough to persist across distance, to carry their shape from where energy entered to locations far from that entry, arriving still recognizable as the form they were given, diminished but not dissolved, the energy still organized enough to call the water at each location into the form it requires. The shapes cross each other, add at some points, cancel at others, separate and continue. Each passes through the water the others are using. Each continues at its own rate through the same continuous medium. At the surface, in the dark, a crest rises. The water at the crest was at the level surface a moment ago. A moment from now, it will be at the level surface again. It is at the crest because the energy arriving from below required it to be there. It will return to level when the energy has passed and the next water ahead has taken the form. The crest is here. The water at the crest is passing through. The energy that requires the crest is passing through. What remains after the shape has passed, the water at the level surface, the deep water at its temperature, the field of other forms still crossing, was there before the shape arrived and continues after it has gone. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. What the ocean held before the shapes arrived is what the ocean holds after they pass. The water at the surface returns to the level the ocean holds when no form is passing through. The deep water continues at its temperature, at its pressure, in its slow currents. The baseline, the state the ocean returns to as each shape diminishes, wasn't waiting for the shapes to arrive and isn't changed by their having passed. The shape crossed, the ocean held. The crossing did not require the ocean to divide. The form appeared without the water becoming a second thing. Each shape was the ocean for the duration of the crossing. The ocean is not making the waves. The ocean is the waves making themselves through the ocean. The boundary between them is still moving. The archive remains. Jung's shadow is not followed here as a hidden self. It is followed as an outline. Some parts of the self appear the way shadows appear, not as separate things, as shapes cast by the body in the directions it is not facing. The shadow does not require the object to look at it to carry the object's shape. The outline is there, on the surface behind, the same edges, the same angles, recorded with precision, whether the source has turned toward it or not. This is what the archive follows tonight, not the part of the shape that is visible to itself, the part recorded on the surfaces it is not facing. The archive begins at the outline. The lamp is on. It sits at the edge of a table in a room that is otherwise dark. A single bulb inside a shade, the shade directing most of the light downward onto the table's surface and allowing some to pass outward in the direction the opening of the shade permits. The light leaves the bulb in all directions. The shade intercepts most of it. What reaches the room beyond is the portion the shade allows through, a cone of illuminated air, the particles suspended in the air briefly visible where the light catches them, the table below the lamp bright, the floor beneath the table bright, the wall behind the lamp receiving a lesser portion of what the shade lets past its rim. An object stands on the table, a glass bottle, cylindrical, the glass slightly green with the minerals the sand carried before it was melted and formed. The bottle stands upright. Its base sits on the bright surface of the table. Its neck rises above the level where the shade begins to block the upward light. The glass is not opaque. It is translucent. It allows some of the light passing through it to continue, altered in color by the mineral content of the glass, refracted at the curved surface of the walls, some reflected back, but not all of the light passes through. The glass absorbs a portion. The curved wall of the bottle bends the transmitted rays away from their original paths. Behind the bottle, on the far wall, a shape appears. The shape on the wall is not the bottle. It is the record of where the light could not go. The lamp sends light in the directions the shade allows. The bottle stands in the path of some of that light. The light that reaches the bottle's glass passes through, emerges altered, continues at new angles. The light that would have traveled in a straight line from the lamp to the wall, unimpeded, is now impeded. The bottle's glass wall is in the way, and what reaches the wall behind the bottle is less than what would have reached it if the bottle were not there. The shape on the wall is the shape of that reduction. Where the bottle's wall fully intercepted the light's path, the wall behind is darker. Where the bottle's wall partially intercepted, at the edges, where the glass curves away and the path length through the glass increases, the wall behind is less dark. Where the bottle did not intercept, outside the bottle's silhouette entirely, the wall receives the full light the lamp allows. The shape on the wall is the bottle's outline. The bottle is not facing the wall. The bottle stands between the lamp and the wall. Glass has no face, no preferred direction, no awareness of what it intercepts. The light arrives. The bottle's geometry intercepts the portion it intercepts. The wall receives what arrives. The outline on the wall describes the bottle with precision. The bottle has not looked at it. The lamp is not directly above the bottle. It is to one side, offset, so that the light arrives at the bottle from an angle rather than from directly overhead. This angle determines the length of the shadow on the wall behind. If the lamp were directly above, the shadow would fall directly below, compressed, the bottle's height contributing only to the shadow's shape at the base, the long vertical dimension of the bottle producing almost no shadow at all. Because the lamp is to the side, the angle is oblique. The light that passes just above the bottle's rim must travel further to reach the wall. The distance from rim to wall, measured along the light's angled path, is longer than the bottle's actual height. The shadow is longer than the bottle is tall. The shadow length is not an error. It is a description of the angle, a record of the relationship between the lamp's position and the bottle's height and the distance to the wall. Change the angle of the lamp and the shadow changes length. Lower the lamp to the side, the shadow extends longer, the bottle's silhouette stretched across more of the wall. Raise the lamp toward overhead. The shadow compresses, the vertical dimension lost, only the horizontal cross-section of the bottle remaining as shadow. Each position of the lamp produces a different shadow. Each shadow is an equally accurate description of the bottle. Not the same description, but accurate from the angle that produced it. The shadow gives a different description depending on where the light is. Every description is precise. A self may carry a shadow of this kind, not the part that faces the light, not the edges that are visible from the direction of the looking, the part whose outline falls on surfaces in the directions the self is not facing. Equally precise. The outline there is made of the same edges as the outline here. The recording continues whether the source has turned toward it or not. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The wall the shadow falls on is not smooth. It was painted. Layers of paint over the plaster beneath. The plaster applied to the wall's surface when the room was built. The surface of the plaster not perfectly flat, but varying within the range the tools produced. Over the years, the paint has settled into the variations of the plaster beneath. The wall's surface, viewed from the side, is not a plane, but a slight topography, rises and hollows, millimeters deep, enough to catch the light at certain angles and leave other areas in relative shade. When the shadow falls on this surface, it follows the surface. The shadow does not maintain the bottle's outline flat and undeformed. It arrives at the wall and takes the shape the wall offers. Where the wall rises slightly, a ridge in the plaster, the shadow arrives at that surface sooner, its edge shifted. Where the wall dips, a hollow in the surface, the shadow arrives later, displaced. The outline of the shadow on this wall is not the outline of the bottle. It is the outline of the bottle modified by the wall's own geography. The bottle has not changed. The outline on the wall has. The surface that receives the shadow contributes to the description. The same shadow, falling on a different wall, a curved wall, a rougher plaster, a wall with an edge or a corner, would produce a different outline. Each outline would be a description of the bottle as modified by the receiver. The bottle is constant. The description varies with the surface. where the shadow falls on a surface that folds, a corner where two walls meet, the shadow bends. On the first wall, it arrives as the expected outline. At the edge of the corner, it continues onto the second wall, bending at the angle of the corner, the silhouette divided across two planes. The bottle's outline is now on two surfaces simultaneously, each carrying a portion, the two portions together making the whole. The bottle produced one shadow. The room's geometry divided it. A second lamp is switched on at the other side of the room. The second lamp is lower than the first and further away, positioned differently in all three dimensions, its cone of light arriving at the bottle from a direction the first lamp does not reach. The bottle now stands in the light of two sources. Two shadows appear on the wall behind the bottle. Each shadow is the record of one lamp's light interrupted by the bottle. Each is accurate. Each describes the bottle's outline as seen from the angle of the lamp that produced it. Because the lamps are at different positions, the two shadows fall at different angles from the bottle's base. They are not the same shadow. They are two equally precise descriptions of the same object, produced simultaneously at different angles, falling on the same wall. Where the two shadows overlap, where both lamps' light is blocked by the bottle simultaneously, the wall is darker. Neither lamp's light reaches that region. The overlap is the area the bottle describes from both angles at once, the region of wall that both descriptions share. Where only one shadow falls, one lamp's light is blocked, but the other still arrives. The wall there is darker than where both lamps reach, but lighter than where neither does. The wall behind the bottle holds, at this moment, three distinct states: full light, where neither shadow falls; partial shadow, where one shadow falls without the other; full shadow, where both shadows overlap. The bottle produced all three by standing in the light of two sources simultaneously. It did not move. It did not turn. It did not attend to any surface it was describing. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The edge of the shadow is not sharp. It fades. The lamp is not a point. It is a source with size, and near the shadow's edge, the wall receives partial light. Some of the lamp blocked by the bottle's outline, some still reaching past it. Where the lamp is fully blocked, the wall is fully dark. Where the lamp is fully visible, the wall is fully lit. Between these, a gradient, the penumbra, the region where the blocking is partial. The penumbra is not an error in the shadow. It is a record of the lamp's size, how wide the source is, encoded in how gradually the edge fades. A smaller source would produce a sharper edge. This lamp, with its filament occupying space, produces this width of transition. The shadow's edge describes the source, not the object. The outline carries the bottle's shape. The edge of the outline carries the lamp's. Two descriptions at once, neither requiring the bottle's attention. The bottle has not moved. Since the lamps were switched on, the bottle has stood where it was placed, the glass walls holding their shape, the base maintaining contact with the table's surface, the neck rising to the same height. The bottle has not attended to the shadows it has produced. It has not observed the outline on the far wall, has not seen the two shadows overlap, has not examined the penumbra at its edges, or noted how the plaster's slight topography has modified the record of its outline. The shadows have continued without the bottle's attention. They are there now, on the wall behind, on the two planes of the corner, the outlines in their current form, the penumbra at each edge holding the record of the lamp's size. If the lamps remain on, the shadows remain. If the bottle were removed, the shadows would vanish immediately. There would be no interruption of the light, no outline to fall on the wall. The shadows exist because the bottle exists, but the shadows do not require the bottle to look at them to continue describing it. The light that the bottle does not intercept continues past it. The light that arrives at the bottle's glass and is absorbed by it becomes heat. A small warming of the glass, distributed through the walls of the bottle and given slowly to the air in contact with the glass. The light that the bottle refracts emerges at new angles, arrives at other surfaces in the room, is absorbed and reflected there. The light that the bottle intercepts without transmitting, blocked, not passing through, is the light that makes the shadow. That light does not reach the wall. What the wall records in its place is the absence. The absence has the bottle's shape. The bottle is not looking at it. The bottle stands on the table in the light of two lamps, facing nothing in particular, producing on every surface in the room that receives its shadow an accurate record of its outline. Each record different, each the description of the same object from a different angle, each continuing as long as the light holds and the bottle stands. In the corner where the two walls meet, the shadow has divided across two planes. The portion on the first wall ends at the corner's edge. The portion on the second wall begins there and continues, angled, the outline bent at the geometry of the room. Together they make the whole. Neither plane holds the complete description. The corner's angle distributes it. On the first wall, the plaster's slight topography has shifted the shadow's edge in the places where the surface rises to meet the light's path sooner. The outline there is the outline the wall's surface allowed. The bottle's geometry, received by the wall's geography. On the ceiling above, a faint shadow falls where the light from the lower of the two lamps passes just beside the bottle's neck and is interrupted by the slight overhang of the table's edge. The bottle did not produce this shadow. The table's edge and the lower lamp's angle produced it together. The ceiling records a shadow that belongs partly to the bottle's presence and partly to the geometry of everything else the light encountered before it arrived there. All of these surfaces are receiving descriptions. The bottle stands in the middle of them, in the light, not looking. The shadows on the wall are still there. The outline of the bottle's silhouette, as the first lamp sees it, falls at its current angle on the wall's slightly uneven surface. The outline of the bottle's silhouette, as the second lamp sees it, falls at its different angle, overlapping in some regions and extending beyond in others. The penumbra at each edge holds the record of each lamp's size. The corner holds its divided portion. The ceiling holds its faint compound record. The bottle stands on the table. The lamps continue. The descriptions continue on every surface the light reaches after the bottle has interrupted it. The bottle is not facing any of them. Every one of them is precise. The archive remains. Lao Tzu's water is not followed here as a teaching about surrender. It is followed as a path. Some actions move the way water moves, not by choosing the direction, by taking the gradient the ground provides at each point, and in the taking, changing the ground. The archive does not follow the instruction. It follows the water that was never given one. The archive begins where the water begins, at the place where the ground first slopes away. The stream runs at the bottom of the valley. It runs at this hour without pause, not because it has decided to continue, but because the ground beneath it slopes, and the water at each point is pulled toward the lower elevation adjacent to it, and the water that was at each point has already moved to the next lower point, and new water has arrived from above to fill what the moving water left. The stream runs because the ground slopes and the water has mass, and the pull toward lower elevation has not ceased. There was no moment when the water chose this valley. The water that is in the stream now did not arrive here with a destination. It arrived as rain on the slopes above, individual drops landing on rock and soil, following the small gradients the surface offered, joining other drops in the channels the surface provided, those channels joining larger channels further down the slope, those channels joining the stream in the valley floor. At each point the water moved to the adjacent lower surface. At no point did it plan the route. The route is what the ground allowed. The ground in this valley is not flat. The valley floor tilts, a gradient that the stream follows. The water surface maintaining the angle the valley floor provides, flowing in the direction the tilt indicates. The gradient is not steep here. The water moves at a pace that reflects what the valley floor offers. Steep gradients accelerate the water, shallow gradients slow it, and the gradient here is moderate, the water moving at the rate the moderate slope allows. The stream does not run in a straight line. Even on this moderate gradient, the stream curves. The curves are not the result of obstacles forcing the water to turn. The valley floor is open, no large rocks blocking a straight path. The curves are the result of the water's own motion, and what that motion does to the surfaces it moves against. The stream bends because it has been bending. The bend it has now is the record of all the bending that came before. The water at the outside of each curve moves faster than the water at the inside. The outside of a curve is the longer path. The water traveling the arc has more distance to cover in the same time as the water at the inner edge. To maintain the flow, the outer water moves faster. Moving faster, it carries more energy. Carrying more energy, it presses harder against the bank at the outer edge of the curve. Pressing harder, it removes more material from that bank, loosening grains of silt and sand and carrying them away, undercutting the bank where the water contacts it, taking each year a small amount from the outer edge that it did not take before. The inner edge receives something different. At the inside of the curve, the water slows. Slowing, it carries less. The smaller particles it was transporting from further upstream are too heavy for the reduced velocity to keep suspended. They settle. At the inner edge of each curve, the stream deposits what the outer edge of another curve contributed, fine sediment, building gradually, the inner bank growing shallower over the years as material accumulates. The curve that exists tonight is not the curve that existed when this stream began. The outer bank has moved, not by much in any single year, but across the years the accumulated removal has shifted the bank outward. The inner bank has moved inward as the sediment built. The curve has deepened. A curve that began as a slight deviation from a straight path has, through the action of water on the banks the curve itself created, become a more pronounced curve. The curve amplified itself, not by deciding to amplify, but because the conditions the curve created favored the continuation of the curve. What the water did to the ground is now what the ground does to the water. Some actions move this way, not by forcing the path, by taking what the ground offers at each point, and in the taking, removing something from one place and placing it in another. The ground that remains is not the ground that was there before the taking. It is the ground the taking made. The water that arrives next finds different ground. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The water in this stream is not all the same water. Water arrives continuously from the slopes above, and water leaves continuously downstream. The water at any point in the stream has been at that point for a brief time. Seconds or minutes in the faster sections, longer in the pools where the current slows. The stream as a structure is continuous. The water in it is constantly replaced. At the inside of a bend, where the bank curves inward and the current has spread across a wider surface, a pool forms. The surface there appears still. It is not outside the stream. The water in the pool is moving, but the descent has widened, and the force that carries through the narrow section has distributed itself across a greater area. What was swift has become broad. What was narrow has become slow. A leaf enters the pool and does not stop at once. It circles. The main current, passing close at the outer edge of the pool, leaves behind a slower return motion. Water that turned back along the inside bank, rather than continuing downstream. The leaf follows that return, tracing a wide arc near the bank, moving opposite to the main flow for a moment, before the outer current catches it again and carries it forward. The eddy is not a refusal of the stream. It is the shape the stream's passing left in the water beside it. A slow rotation, drawing from the main flow and returning to it. Present only because the current moved through and left a space the water behind it filled by turning back. The leaf circles once, twice, and then the outer edge of the rotation brings it to the main current again. The pool did not hold it. The pool held the condition for its temporary turning. What the stream carries changes with its speed. In the faster sections, where the gradient steepens, where the stream narrows between rock, the water moves with enough energy to carry larger particles. Grains of sand and fine gravel are lifted from the streambed and transported downstream, suspended in the moving water, traveling until the current slows enough that the water can no longer hold them at that weight. In the slower sections, where the valley widens, where the gradient eases, the water releases what it can no longer carry. The particles settle out, depositing in the places where the stream's velocity has fallen below the threshold their size requires. The streambed is a record of the water's speed at each location. Where the bed is gravel, coarser particles, the water was moving fast enough to carry finer material away, but not fast enough to move the gravel. Where the bed is fine silt, the water slows to a pace that can carry nothing. Where the bed is bare rock, the water moves fast enough to carry everything the rock gives it, given sufficient time. And the rock gives what it gives over centuries of contact. Each material the stream encounters contributes something. The rock gives what water can take from it slowly, invisible, carried without altering the water's appearance. The soil gives finer particles, suspended and transported. The organic material from the banks enters the stream and is carried, decomposing as it travels. The water arrives at the valley floor, different from the water that fell as rain on the slopes above. It has passed through what it passed through. Further down the valley, a second stream enters from the side. The two streams meet at the confluence, the point where the valley floor has directed them to the same location, where both gradients have converged. The meeting is not violent. Both streams have lost speed as they approach the wider valley floor. They arrive at the confluence at the pace the lower gradient allows. For some distance below the confluence, the two streams run alongside each other without fully mixing. Each stream carries its own temperature, its own sediment load, its own chemistry from the different slopes it descended. These differences do not vanish at the moment of meeting. The water from each stream maintains its properties for a distance, visible in some conditions as a line where the two waters meet, each holding its character against the other. The mixing happens gradually. Over the distance the combined flow requires to fully exchange what each brought. Below that distance, the merged stream carries a single chemistry, a single temperature, the record of both sources now indistinguishable. The confluence did not erase what each stream carried. It created the conditions for the gradual exchange. What each contributed is now in everything downstream. Not all the water that falls on these slopes reaches the stream directly. Some enters the ground, moving down through soil, through fractured rock, following the same pull toward lower elevation, but through a medium that slows the movement to a different scale. Water moving through soil takes days. Water moving through rock takes years. Water moving through dense rock at depth takes centuries, entering cracks too small to see. dissolving small amounts of what it contacts, moving at the rate the ground allows. The water that emerges as a spring has been underground for a period the surface cannot record. It carries the temperature of the depth it traveled. Cold in summer, the surface seasons not yet reached it. It arrives at the valley floor as water that left the surface in another season, having taken the path the rock provided for as long as the rock required. The stream below the spring holds several histories at once. Recent rain, older water that moved slowly through the ground, each arriving now in this current, indistinguishable from the other, each having taken only the path the ground allowed. The curves in this stream will continue to change. The outer banks will continue to receive the water's force at the outside of each bend, and the banks will continue to give what the force requires, slowly, at the rate the material allows, but continuously. The inner banks will continue to receive the deposits the slowing water releases. The curves will continue to deepen until they reach the geometry at which the stream cuts a new, shorter path, abandoning the deep curve to a still pool beside the main channel. The abandoned curve holding water that no longer moves, the main channel now running straighter for a distance before the next curve begins its own amplification. The abandoned curve was not a failure. It was the path the stream took while the path was available. When the accumulated deepening of the curve created conditions for a shorter path, the water took the shorter path, not because it decided to, but because the shorter path was lower and the gradient toward it was steeper than the gradient around the remaining curve. The old path is now still water. The new path carries the current. Both are the result of water taking the gradient the ground offered at each moment. The ground that directed the water is not the ground that the water left. Where the bank eroded, the valley is wider. Where the sediment deposited, the valley floor is higher. Where the rock dissolved over long contact, the ground below holds the record of what the water removed. The stream runs tonight in the channel the previous water made. The water running now is making the channel the next water will find. The water in the stream does not hold the valley's shape in mind. It holds only the gradient at each point. The pull toward the adjacent lower surface, the response to that pull at the rate the channel and the load allow. The stream takes the path it takes because that path is lower. It changes the path because the taking changes what is lower. The valley was here before this water. This water is here because the valley was. The valley that will be here after this water will be the valley this water made. At the curves, the water continues to press against the outer bank. At each gentle gradient, the water continues to release what it cannot carry at that speed. At the spring below the slope, water that entered the ground in another season continues to emerge, carrying what the rock gave it slowly. At the confluence downstream, the two histories continue their gradual exchange, becoming indistinguishable over the distance the mixing requires. An action may move this way, not by imposing a shape on what receives it, by entering the shape already offered, the gradient that is there, the channel that the previous water left, and passing through at the rate the ground allows. The path is not obeyed as an order, it is used as a condition, and the condition, once used, is not the same condition. The water that did not force has still moved the bank. The water that did not resist has still left a channel. What arrived without insisting on direction has changed the direction of everything that arrives after. Not because the water decided to change it, because passing through is not the same as leaving what you passed through as it was. The water takes the gradient takes the water's passage. What the water did not carry away in particles, it carried away in the shape of what remains. The ground slopes, the water moves. The moving changes the slope. The changed slope is what the next water finds. The archive remains. Epictetus's distinction is not followed here as a rule for living. It is followed as a boundary. Some distinctions hold the way the body holds its temperature, not by choosing what arrives, by maintaining what is kept at the exact place where maintaining is possible. The archive does not follow the instruction. It follows the boundary the body has always known. The place where what can be held meets what cannot be reached. The archive begins at the skin. The body is lying in a room. The room is at its temperature. The temperature the night outside has set, modified by the walls that slow the exchange, and the small warmth the body itself has been giving to the air since it lay down. The body and the room are at different temperatures. The body is warmer. This difference is not accidental. It is maintained. The skin is the boundary, not a wall. The skin does not stop the exchange between the body and the room. Heat moves through it continuously. The body giving heat to the air in contact with the skin. The air giving a fraction back. The net exchange determined by the difference between the body's surface temperature and the air temperature at each point. The skin is the place where the body's regulation ends and the room's condition begins. On the inside of that boundary, the body holds its core temperature within a narrow range, not fixed absolutely. The core is slightly warmer when active, slightly lower in deep rest, but held. The range is narrow. The mechanisms that hold it are not resting. On the outside of that boundary, the room holds its own temperature. The body does not determine it. The body at rest is not doing nothing. Beneath the stillness of the surface, the body is working continuously at the maintenance of what it maintains. Metabolic processes in every cell release heat as a consequence of the chemical reactions that sustain the cell's activity. The blood carries that heat from where it is produced, the organs, the working muscle, toward the periphery, toward the skin, where it can be released to the air. The vessels near the skin surface widen or narrow to adjust how much heat reaches the surface for release. When the core temperature rises above its range, the vessels widen. More heat reaches the surface, more passes to the air. When the core temperature falls, the vessels narrow. Less heat reaches the surface. The body conserves what it has. This is happening now in the lying body, in the quiet room. The temperature the core holds is the result of these continuous adjustments, not a state the body was given and simply maintains by inertia, but a state the body produces moment to moment through the balance of generation and release. The skin surface is cooler than the core. The air just above the skin is cooler than the skin surface. This gradient, core to skin to air, is the shape of the body's work, expressed as temperature across distance. The gradient is continuous. The regulation that maintains it is also continuous. The vessels adjusting, the metabolism producing, the surface releasing, all of it in balance at this moment. The room's temperature is not produced by the body. The air in the room holds the temperature the room's conditions allow. The temperature outside, the rate at which the walls conduct that temperature inward, the small warmth the body has added, the time elapsed since the room was last warmer or cooler than it is now. The air nearest to the body is warmer than the air at the far wall, because the body has been giving heat to the air in its immediate vicinity since it lay down. The air at the far wall is closer to the room's ambient temperature, which is closer to what the night outside holds. The body has warmed the air nearest to it. The body has not warmed the room. The air in the room presses on the surface of the body from every direction. This is the weight of the atmosphere above, the column of air extending from the room's ceiling to the upper edge of the atmosphere, pressing down on everything below it at the rate its mass requires. The body receives this pressure at every point on its surface. The pressure is large, far larger than the forces the body's own muscles produce in stillness. The body does not push back against it. The body's own pressure, internal, holds the shape of the body's tissues from collapsing inward. These pressures, the body's internal and the atmosphere's external, are in balance. The body did not produce the atmospheric pressure. The body did not determine it. The body maintains internal pressure at the level that meets it. The sounds outside the room arrive at the walls without asking. The walls take a portion and return the rest. What passes through arrives in the room's air at reduced amplitude. The traffic on the distant road, the wind against the building's surface, the intermittent sounds the night produces, these arrive whether the body attends to them or not. They do not require the body's reception to exist in the air. The body cannot choose what the air carries. The body carries its position in space. Without looking, without light, without any information from outside the boundary, the body registers the position of its own limbs, the angle of each joint, the weight of each part against the surface it rests on, the slight pressure at the shoulder, the hip, the heel, where the body meets the bed. This registration comes from within the boundary, from the small sensors in the muscles and joints and tendons that report, continuously, the position of each part relative to the others. The body does not need the room to hold itself. The room's shape is outside the boundary. The body does not carry the room's shape from within. It holds the points of contact where it meets the surface, where the surface pushes back. But the space beyond those contact points is not reported by what the body holds inside itself. The room's dimensions, its temperature at the far wall, the position of the objects in it, these arrive, if at all, through the senses that reach outward, the eyes and ears that bring the outside to the boundary's edge. The body's registration of itself requires no outward reaching. It is held entirely within. The body receives what arrives at the boundary. It does not determine what arrives. A mind may hold a boundary of this kind, not what arrives at the boundary, that continues at its own temperature, its own pressure, its own intensity, but the maintenance of what is kept on the inside, the regulation that holds what it holds, not by stopping what comes, but by adjusting, continuously, what is produced and released within the place where adjustment is possible. The boundary is not armor. It is the place where what can be maintained meets what cannot be changed. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The breath can be adjusted. The rate of breathing, how many times per minute the chest rises and falls, can be changed by attention. Slower, the body can breathe. Deeper, drawing more air into the lower chambers of the lungs with each cycle. The muscles of the chest and the diaphragm respond to the adjustment the body gives them. The rate, the depth, the timing of each breath. These are within the range of what can be regulated. The composition of the air cannot be adjusted. The breath draws in what the room's air contains. The proportion of gases the room holds at this altitude, at this temperature, in this particular enclosed space. The body cannot choose the composition. It cannot increase the oxygen in the room by breathing differently. It takes what the air offers and uses what it can use. The body adjusts to what it receives. When the air is cooler, the passages that carry it inward warm it before it reaches the tissue where the exchange occurs. Surfaces transferring heat to the incoming air, conditioning it across the short distance of the airway before it arrives where it needs to arrive. The body cannot warm the room. The body can warm the air in the passage between the room and the place where the air meets the blood. The adjustment happens at the boundary of what is reachable, not further. In the slower breathing of rest, the exchange is sufficient. Less air moved per minute, but the body's requirements at rest are less. The breath rate and the body's needs have come into correspondence. Both have arrived at what this moment requires. The body from outside appears still. The surface does not move except for the slow rise and fall of the chest, the small motions of the breath. No visible motion at the hands, the face, the legs. To the room, the body is at rest. Inside the boundary, continuous motion. The blood moves through the vessels at the rate the resting heart produces. The slower rhythm of rest, fewer beats per minute than when active, still moves the blood through the full circuit of the body many times per minute. The organs receive what they need at the rate they need it. The liver continues its work. The kidneys continue their work. The cells in every tissue continue the chemical activity that sustains them. None of this has slowed to stillness. The stillness is at the surface. Below the surface, the body continues at the rate the body requires. The heart adjusts its rate. Slower now, the resting body requires less, the heart meeting that requirement with less frequent contraction. The chambers fill and empty at the rate rest requires, the muscle responding to what the body needs at this moment. The rate is not fixed. It tracks the body's condition continuously and meets it. When something arrives from outside the boundary, a sound, a change in temperature, information of any kind, the heart may respond. Its rate may shift briefly. Then, when the body has assessed what arrived and determined that the internal state requires no sustained change, the rate returns. The adjustment was within the heart's reach. The sound that caused it was not. The heart responded to what it could respond to, from within the place where response is possible. The night outside continues at its own pace. The heart continues at its own. As the body moves towards sleep, the boundary does not weaken. Consciousness narrows its reach. The sounds that arrived a moment ago at the boundary's edge become less distinct. The information from the room recedes. The attention that was moving outward toward what the senses reported begins to draw back toward the inside. The body's regulation does not draw back with it. The temperature is held. The breath continues. The heart maintains its rhythm. These continue without the attention that, in waking, accompanies them. The body knows how to maintain the inside without supervision. The regulation has not waited for attention to begin. It was running before attention was present, will continue after attention withdraws, has never required the watching to perform the maintaining. The maintenance is not a consequence of awareness. It is a condition that awareness, when present, simply finds already in place. What the body regulates at the boundary continues into the deeper states. What the room holds outside the boundary also continues. The temperature of the air, the pressure of the atmosphere, the sounds that move through the walls at the amplitude the night's sources produce. None of these wait for the body's attention to return before continuing. They continue at their own rates, by their own conditions, indifferent to whether the body on the inside of the boundary is conscious of them or not. The distinction does not require awareness to hold. The boundary is there whether attended to or not. On the inside, the core holds its temperature. The blood continues its circulation, the vessels adjusting their diameter at the periphery to maintain the balance between generation and release. The breath continues its slow cycle, the diaphragm descending and releasing at the rate the resting body requires. The heart continues its rhythm, meeting what this moment needs with the frequency this moment needs. The organs continue their work inside the stillness the surface presents. On the outside, the room holds its temperature. The air in the room continues at the pressure the atmosphere maintains. The sounds of the night pass through the walls at their own amplitude. The light from outside continues at whatever intensity the night outside holds. The body does not reach outside the skin to adjust what the room holds. The body holds what it holds on the inside of where holding is possible. This is not a withdrawal. It is the precise location of what can be maintained. The body has always known this location. The vessels adjust at the periphery. The breath slows to what rest requires. The heart meets what the body needs. None of this reaches the room's temperature. None of it was meant to. The air outside the skin continues at its temperature. The body continues at its own. The boundary between them is still at the skin. On one side, what the body maintains. On the other, what continues regardless. Both are still. Both continue. The archive remains. Seneca's reminder is not followed here as a warning. It is followed as a structure. Some things carry what they will outlast. The bone does not wait for what comes after to become what it already is. It is already that, carrying the body now, holding the shape the body requires, already the most enduring thing in the room. The archive does not follow the warning. It follows the structure the warning points toward, the thing already present in the body that will remain when the rest is gone. The archive begins inside the body, in the bone. The body is lying in a room. The surface is still, the skin at its temperature, the chest rising and falling at the slow rate of rest. From outside, from the room's perspective, the body is at rest. Inside the surface, the structures that the surface covers are still doing what they do. The heart moving the blood, the breath exchanging what the lungs exchange, the smaller work of the cells continuing at the rate cells continue. And deeper than any of that, further from the surface, closer to the center of each limb and each part of the torso, the bone. The skeleton occupies the interior of the body the way a frame occupies the interior of a structure. Not decorative, not incidental. The shape the body holds when standing, the shape it holds when lying, the forces the body can bear and apply. These are determined by what the bone provides, the rigid members that the muscles pull against, the joints that define the degrees of movement available, the protection the curved bones of the skull and the curved cage of the ribs provide to what they enclose. Without the bone, the body has no leverage. Without the bone, the body has no form that persists when force is applied. The bone is not stone. This is the first thing to know about what is inside the body tonight. What appears in images of bones long separated from the body, white, dry, permanent in its stillness, is not what bone is inside the living body. Inside the body, bone is tissue. It is alive. It is supplied with blood. It is maintained by cells. It changes. The bone is made of two materials combined. The first is mineral, a crystalline lattice of calcium and phosphate, the same minerals found in rock and soil and water, arranged in the repeating geometry the crystal structure requires. This mineral gives bone its hardness, its resistance to compression. A bone under load presses the mineral lattice against itself. The geometry of the crystal distributes the force across the structure, returning most of it as resistance. What stone does by being stone, bone does by being mineral at the microscopic scale. The second material is protein fiber, long chains wound together, embedded throughout the mineral. These fibers give bone its resilience, its resistance to fracture. A bone struck sharply does not shatter the way stone would shatter. The fibers flex. They absorb some of the force. They allow the bone to bend slightly before breaking. Without the mineral, bone would be flexible and weak. Without the fiber, bone would be brittle. The two together give bone what neither provides alone. The surface of the bone is covered by a membrane, thin, fibrous, adhering closely to the bone's outer surface. This membrane carries the blood vessels that supply the bone and the cells that live within it. It is the place where the bone is most sensitive to what arrives, where a sharp blow registers, where the first response to fracture begins. The membrane is continuous with the tendons that attach to the bone. The pull of the muscle transmits through the tendon, through this membrane, into the bone. The bone receives the force. Over time, it responds by adjusting its density at that location. The bone does not receive the force passively. It receives it and adapts. The bone is being remade, not replaced wholesale. The structure persists, but the mineral crystal and the protein fiber that make up the bone at any given location are not the same mineral and fiber that were there a year ago or 5 years ago. Cells in the bone continuously remove material and deposit new material in its place. Cells that dissolve the mineral and fiber, releasing what they contain back into the blood. Cells that form new mineral and fiber, depositing fresh material in the spaces the dissolving cells have made. These two populations of cells are working now in the bones of the lying body, in the quiet room. The bone that will be here in a year is being made tonight. The remaking is not uniform. Where the bone bears more load, where the forces of movement and weight concentrate, the depositing cells are more active. The bone becomes denser at the places where the load concentrates. The mineral crystal is thicker there. The arrangement of the fibers aligns with the direction the load travels through the bone. A cross-section of a bone that has been carrying consistent load for years shows this. Denser at the surfaces that bear the weight, the architecture of the material organized along the lines of force the bone has repeatedly encountered. The bone has been shaped by what it has been asked to do. The places where the load was greatest, the leg bones in a body that has walked many years, the arm bones dominant on one side, the spine where the weight of the body above presses down through each vertebra. These places are different from the bones of a body that move differently. The bone holds the record of the forces it has received, not as a scar, as an architecture. A reminder may work this way, not by pointing toward an ending, by revealing what has already been built to remain. Some things have already become what they will remain, not in stillness, in the continuous work of holding the shape the body requires. The structure that will outlast the rest of the body is holding the body now. It does not wait for what comes after to be what it is. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The bone carries the record of what the body has already passed through, fractures that healed. The bone at a healed fracture site is different from the bone that was never broken. The repair process deposits new material at the break, building across the gap, often producing a region denser than the bone on either side. The fracture line is no longer a fracture. It is a record of a fracture, preserved in the arrangement of the material. readable in the structure of what healed. The bone does not distinguish the fracture from the repair. It holds what the repair produced. In the same way, the places where the body's habitual posture concentrates load, the joint surfaces, the weight-bearing regions of the spine, the heel where the foot strikes the ground in walking, these places carry the cumulative record of all the times that load arrived. Not a single event, but the total of the events, expressed as the density and architecture that the accumulation produced. What the body has done is in the bone, not as memory, not as feeling, as structure. The material arrangement that the accumulated forces required, the density that formed in response to what was repeatedly asked of the bone, the record of healed damage and adapted load that is now simply the shape the bone has. The bone that is inside this body tonight carries the history of this body in its architecture. The geometry of the cell's arrangement reflects where load came from, how often, at what intensity. None of this is visible from outside the body. None of it requires attention to persist. It is there regardless. The bone holds more than one time. Near the ends of the long bones, where the body once grew in length, the line where growth ended is still present. A boundary inside the structure, not an event the body remembers, but a fact the bone carries. The body does not recall when it stopped growing taller. The bone holds the fact that it did. The surface where a tendon has pulled for many years carries that time. The place where a joint has received the same direction of pressure carries that time. These are not memories. They are time made into architecture. The bone that was forming before the first words is here now. The bone that adapted after years of standing, walking, resting carries later forces. The bone being remade tonight belongs to the same structure. Several times are present in one bone. The time before memory, the time of use, the time of what is being built tonight, the time of what will remain. The bone is cooler than the organs. The heat the body produces comes primarily from the metabolic work of the organs and the active muscle. The cells burning what they burn, releasing the heat that the blood carries outward toward the skin. The bone produces less of its own heat. It is denser, its internal movement slower. The blood that passes through the bone does warm it, but the bone's temperature is lower than the temperature at the body's core. Closer to the surface, each bone is cooler still. The outer surface of the bone nearest the skin approaching the temperature gradient that the skin maintains between the body and the room. The bone is part of the body's thermal interior, but it occupies the cooler region of that interior. In the center of each long bone, the shaft of the femur, the humerus, the tibia, the interior is not solid. The outer shell of compact bone gives way toward the center to a different architecture, a lattice of thin struts and plates, the spaces between them filled with marrow. The marrow is where the blood cells are made, the cells that carry oxygen through the blood, the cells that respond to infection, the cells that initiate clotting when a vessel is cut. These are made continuously in the interior of the bone, in the marrow that the bone's outer shell protects. The bone that appears most solid is hollow at its core. The hollow is not absence. It is the place where the bone's other work is done. Given enough time, far beyond the life of the body, the bone changes again. When the soft tissue is gone, the bone that remains is still not stone. It is still the mineral crystal and the protein fiber, the architecture of the load it bore, the density distribution of a body that moved in particular ways. Over years, the protein fiber breaks down as the remaining chemistry acts on it. What persists longest is the mineral lattice, the crystal structure of calcium and phosphate that was always the harder, more permanent component. Given longer still, given water carrying dissolved minerals through the ground, given pressure, given time measured in thousands of years, the original mineral of the bone may be replaced, crystal by crystal, by the minerals the ground carries. The shape of the bone is preserved, the architecture of the load it bore is preserved, but the original material is gone, replaced gradually by what the ground provided. The bone has become stone, not by ceasing to be the bone, by having its material replaced so slowly that the form was never lost. What persists is the shape. The shape was already there, in the living bone, in the architecture the load produced, in the density that formed in response to what the body asked of it. The mineralization that will come, if it comes, does not make the bone permanent. The bone's form was already the most permanent thing about it. The structure that will outlast the body is holding the body now, not as a preparation for what comes after, as the only way the body has of standing, of bearing what it bears, of carrying forward the shape the forces of a life have made of it. The bone in this body tonight is doing what it does. The depositing cells are placing new material where the dissolving cells have made space. The mineral lattice is distributing the small forces that arrive even in stillness. The weight of the body pressing down through the skeleton against the surface, the slight tension of the muscles that hold the position of rest. The marrow in the interior is making what the marrow makes. The architecture of each bone holds the record of all the load that came before. None of this requires the body to be awake. None of it requires attention. The bone that was here before the body's first memory is here now. The bones of the face, the orbital ridges above the eyes, the zygomatic arches at the cheeks, the mandible that holds the lower teeth, were forming before the body learned to speak, before the body could hold its own head upright, before the body knew the room it is lying in tonight. Those bones are here, adapted by decades of use, remodeled continuously, the mineral replaced and replaced again. But the shape, the fundamental geometry, present since before the body had language for what it was. The bone is older than everything the body remembers. It will be here after the last thing the body can experience is gone. It does not require the body's awareness to exist. It exists in the dark of the body's interior, doing what it has always done, holding the shape the body requires, carrying the record the forces of a life have made of it, already the most enduring thing in this room, already what it will remain. The archive remains.